Luke Vargas joins us today from Colombia. Luke is, of course, the United Nations Correspondent for Talk Radio News Service. He has joined us from the Democratic and Republican National Conventions in 2012, from Warsaw, Poland, from Jordan. I think I might be forgetting one. But in any case, Luke, you're in Colombia today. What are you doing there?
Well, I'm here for the UN's World Urban Forum. Unlike those talks in Poland, which were overtly political, this is just a dialogue, basically. There are 20,000 people here, and they're discussing essentially best practices for how to sustain an urban environment.
So there's this meeting, ideas are being shared, and the topic of sustaining environments right now is important all over the world. What are the kind of specifics of what's being discussed there?
Before we get to that, I just wanted to say a few things about Colombia and Medellin because I think, as I judge from the reaction a lot of people had, including my family and friends, to hearing I was going to be in Colombia and Medellin, this country has really undergone a tremendous transformation. This Colombia was for a long time synonymous with the global drug trade, with basically the practice of kidnapping for ransom, which was a big deal for Americans for quite some time. And this event could not have come at a better time. This is the home of Pablo Escobar in the old days, but the homicide rate has gone down from its height in 1991 when 6,500 people were killed in 1 year. It's about a tenth of that now. And now a lot of this gang activity, violent activity, is transitioning, again, from those violent practices towards more common forms of exploitation. This is extorting shopkeepers and things. And it's actually sort of this strange Muslim Brotherhood Hamas effect, perhaps, in which some of these violent groups have begun to provide social services to some extent and creating a competition to provide things for the people here. And that forced the government's hand in some ways. And now, and the reason why this conference is probably being held here is because they have done so much to provide infrastructure to the people in this city. And they're really seen, the Wall Street Journal actually named Medellin last year the most innovative city in the world. To answer your first question about the themes here, it's very clear I'm in South America. There are a lot of scholars who have come up from Brazil, people who are frustrated with how Brazil has managed the way they're hosting the World Cup and later the Olympics. Basically, this legacy of mega events is coming into sharp focus, where so many cities spend billions, in the case of Brazil, I think it's close to $75 billion, building venues that are of dubious long-term impact. And a lot of people are saying, instead of doing that, Medellin has done the right thing, which is to almost pretend it was going to be hosting a mega event, doing all the transit upgrades, thinking about housing, thinking about just general infrastructure improvements, and building them for their own purposes, so that when a mega event wants to come to town, like this UN conference, the journalists who are here from around the country, which include a lot of travel writers, come here and they write these great stories about how well Medellin and Colombia have put their priorities in order, which is very much the opposite story that we've been hearing about Brazil.
Yeah, and this, being from Argentina myself, there are just so many different topics we could talk about there. I mean, one, generally speaking, of course, and this isn't just limited to South America, it's the long-term impact of Olympics and World Cup in countries. That's one issue. The other issue is South American infrastructure. Right now in Argentina, there's just a crazy countrywide public transportation strike that has completely paralyzed the country. So I think that's a good place to go into kind of the next topic with you, which is, what is the urban strategy there in the city?
Well, like most of Colombia, Medellin experiences substantial financial inequity and inequality. But instead of dealing with that as some of the ways I've seen in the U.S. as a social nuisance or a problem that can only be corrected by force or police, the city has acknowledged the inequality, and they've decided to start their infrastructure improvements in these worst neighborhoods. Some of the best schools, some of the best libraries and sporting and recreational facilities have been laid down in these slums, if you will. So instead of isolating these neighborhoods from the rest of the city, instead of, I've seen in some U.S. cities, making it really hard for people in these neighborhoods to get to their jobs in the better parts of the city, circuitous bus routes and the like, they've actually made it very easy for people in these bad neighborhoods to commute, to get jobs in the city, and thus bring up those neighborhoods. So, they've built elevator systems in these really steep neighborhoods to help people get home quicker. There's a few neighborhoods I went where they've created these pedestrian bridges over ravines that were pretty much impossible to cross over before. So starting at the most needy areas instead of doing very glitzy things in the downtown area.
Yeah, and I'm noticing, by the way, for people who are watching, all of the pictures we're seeing here are pictures that Luke took over the last few days in Colombia. We see the kind of hilly nature of the city of Medellin. Is that part of why it's difficult to put in a public transit network? I mean, is that a challenge simply because of the hilly nature of the city?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I think they've overcome it quite well. There's traditional buses that are all over the city. They're very colorful. They have these religious icons painted onto them and these very unsafe wood benches without seatbelts. Those are really less suited, as you could imagine, to the surrounding hills. That doesn't stop them in some instances. But the city started with a dedicated bus lane. It did a traditional sort of overground rail network, and they built these beautiful stations that connect all these different types of transit very seamlessly. And the one thing they did, which most of the journalists here are talking about, there are architecture critics from around the world who gush about Medellin. They built this cable car system. It's actually built by a German firm that does a lot of ski resorts in the Alps. And what it does basically integrates in with the other networks. You can transfer to it easily, and then without much of a footprint, with very low costs compared to digging a subway network, for example. They connect these neighborhoods that again were pretty much impossible to connect using any of those traditional systems. And now this is so successful that Medellin is in talks with a number of other countries around Latin America to implement similar systems. And as much as I tried to squeeze out the representatives from this firm for details, New York is actually one of the cities that they're in discussions with. So perhaps this really cool and quite scenic way of getting around may be coming to the U.S. before too long.
Hey, so last thing, Luke, the aerial pictures you took, I think it's from a helicopter and it was a police helicopter. Give us a little bit of the behind the scenes on what that was like.
Yeah, a few months ago, I was telling a colleague, I want to travel to a country like Colombia and embed with the police and take photos out of a helicopter. Not because there was a news peg, but because it sounded so fun. Lo and behold, got in touch with the police here, and some of the organizers here helped facilitate a helicopter overflight of the city. So got an incredible glimpse of what the city looks like from above, and it's much easier to understand when you have that incredible viewpoint. It was very cool.
All right, Luke Vargas, United Nations correspondent for Talk Radio News Service, checking in today from Medellin, Colombia. Luke, great to talk to you as always.
Sure thing, David. Take care.